There is a moment in everyone's life when they begin to feel a subtle shift in their emotional world. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. It begins the moment you start caring more about someone's presence than your own peace. The moment when your mood begins to depend on whether they respond. The moment when your mind begins to revolve around their attention. And at first, it feels harmless. Natural even. You tell yourself it's normal to care, normal to hope, normal to wait. But beneath the surface, something far more dangerous begins to take root, because the moment your emotional stability becomes tied to something outside of your control, you begin to lose something essential. You begin to lose your center. Your thoughts become restless. Your focus becomes fragmented. Your sense of calm begins to weaken. And without realizing it, you begin to chase. Chasing is not always visible. It does not always look like desperation. Sometimes it looks like anticipation. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like loyalty. But internally, it is something else entirely. It is dependency. It is the gradual shift from being emotionally self-sufficient to being emotionally reliant. It is the moment when your peace begins to require someone else's participation. And this is where suffering begins. Not because the other person is intentionally causing harm, but because you have unknowingly surrendered authority over your inner state. If you want to become someone who never loses control over their emotional world, someone who remains calm, grounded, and respected regardless of external circumstances, subscribe to this channel now, because here you are not learning how to control others, you are learning how to master yourself, and that is where true power begins. Most people never realize how much energy they waste chasing attention. Not just physical energy, but psychological energy, the energy of thinking, the energy of waiting, the energy of wondering. They replay conversations in their mind, they analyze silence, they search for hidden meaning in delayed responses. They interpret absence as rejection, and this constant mental activity slowly drains them, not physically, but emotionally. Their nervous system remains in a constant state of anticipation. Their peace becomes conditional. Their stability becomes fragile. And the tragedy is that they believe this behavior brings them closer to what they want. But it does the opposite. Because chasing never creates respect, it creates imbalance. It creates an invisible dynamic where one person becomes emotionally centered and the other becomes emotionally dependent. And human beings, at a subconscious level, are always sensitive to this imbalance. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that suffering begins when we confuse what we control with what we do not control. He taught that your thoughts, your actions, and your choices belong to you, but the reactions of others do not. Their attention does not. Their feelings do not. And the moment you attach your emotional state to something outside your control, you place your peace in unstable territory. Think about how much of your emotional life has been shaped by things you never controlled. Someone's reply, someone's tone, someone's presence, someone's absence. And each time you allowed these external events to dictate your internal state, you reinforced a dangerous pattern. You taught your mind that your peace must be earned externally, that your calm must be granted by someone else, that your stability is conditional. But the Stoics understood something that most people never learn. They understood that emotional independence is the foundation of strength. It is the ability to remain internally stable regardless of external movement. It is the ability to experience uncertainty without losing yourself. It is the ability to remain whole, even when something outside of you is incomplete. Chasing destroys this wholeness, because chasing shifts your focus away from your own life, your own growth, your own purpose, and redirects it toward uncertainty. You begin to prioritize their attention over your evolution, their presence over your progress, their validation over your identity, and slowly you become disconnected from yourself. This disconnection is the root of emotional weakness. Not weakness as an insult, but weakness as a condition where your emotional state becomes externally regulated, where your peace becomes externally regulated, where your identity becomes externally influenced. And people can feel this, even if they cannot explain it logically, even if they do not consciously recognize it. They feel it subconsciously, because stability is felt, presence is felt, self-possession is felt. And the absence of these qualities is felt too. There is a reason why people are naturally drawn to those who appear calm and grounded. It is not because they are emotionally cold, it is because they are emotionally self-contained. Their presence does not seek to extract validation. Their presence does not seek to secure reassurance. Their presence exists independently. This independence creates psychological gravity. The Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about this internal sovereignty. He reminded himself that the mind becomes unshakable when it learns to depend only on itself, because when your stability comes from within, it cannot be taken from you. It cannot be withdrawn. It cannot be withheld. But when your stability depends on someone else, it becomes fragile. It becomes negotiable. It becomes vulnerable. This is why chasing creates anxiety, because anxiety is not caused by uncertainty itself. It is caused by dependence on certainty. It is caused by needing an outcome you cannot control. It is caused by attaching your emotional well-being to something unpredictable. When you stop chasing, you interrupt this cycle. You begin to return your attention to yourself. And this is where recovery begins. Recovery of your focus, recovery of your peace, recovery of your strength. If you have ever felt yourself losing your peace while waiting for someone else's attention, comment below. I return to myself. Because the moment you consciously return your attention inward, you begin to reclaim your power. The transformation that follows is subtle at first. You begin to notice your impulses instead of obeying them. You feel the urge to check your phone, but you pause. You feel the urge to reach out, but you observe the urge instead of acting on it. And in that moment of observation, something extraordinary happens. You create space between stimulus and response. This space is where freedom exists. Most people live their entire lives without this space. They react automatically, emotionally, instinctively. But the Stoic develops awareness. He develops the ability to witness his emotions without being controlled by them. This is the beginning of emotional mastery. Each time you resist the urge to chase, you strengthen your internal foundation. Each time you choose presence over pursuit, you reinforce your independence. Each time you remain still in the face of uncertainty, you build resilience. And slowly, your nervous system begins to recalibrate. It stops expecting external validation as a requirement for peace. It stops associating silence with threat. It stops associating absence with loss. You begin to feel stable again, not because the external world has changed, but because you have changed your relationship with it. This is the Stoic advantage, the ability to remain internally unmoved by external instability. Because the Stoic does not seek emotional security in others, he builds it within himself, and once this internal stability is established, something remarkable happens. You stop fearing loss, not because loss is impossible, but because you understand that your identity does not depend on what leaves. Your identity depends on what remains, and what remains is you, your mind, your discipline, your presence. This realization changes how you move through the world. You stop acting out of fear. You stop acting out of insecurity. You stop acting out of emotional scarcity. You begin to act from stability, and stability is power. Because when you are stable, you are not easily manipulated. You are not easily controlled. You are not easily destabilized. Your emotional state becomes self-governed. This is what makes the Stoic different. He does not chase reassurance. He generates reassurance internally. He does not chase validation. He embodies validation. He does not chase presence. He becomes present. And this internal shift is visible. People notice it, not because you announce it, but because it radiates through your behavior. Your responses become slower, your reactions become calmer, your presence becomes quieter but stronger. You no longer move with urgency, you move with intention, and intention commands respect. Because respect is not granted to those who chase, it is granted to those who remain grounded. This is the paradox most people never understand. The more you chase, the less powerful you appear. The more you remain centered, the more powerful you become. Because power is not expressed through pursuit. Power is expressed through self-possession. And self-possession cannot be faked. It is built slowly, through discipline, through awareness, through restraint, through choosing yourself again and again. This is where your transformation begins, not by changing others, but by reclaiming yourself. There is a moment when everything begins to change, not outside of you, but within you. It is the moment when you stop asking, why are they distant? And begin asking, why did I abandon myself? This question is uncomfortable because it forces you to see the truth, that every moment you spent chasing someone else's attention was a moment you were neglecting your own evolution. Every moment you waited for their validation was a moment you delayed validating yourself. Every moment you feared losing them was a moment you lost connection with yourself. But the Stoics understood that awareness is the beginning of freedom, because once you see the pattern, you are no longer controlled by it unconsciously. You begin to recognize the impulses that once controlled you automatically. You begin to see how emotional dependence forms, not suddenly, but gradually, through repetition, through reinforcement, through habit. Each time you interrupt your own peace to seek reassurance, the habit strengthens. Each time you sacrifice your focus to monitor someone else's attention, the habit deepens. Each time you abandon your emotional center to pursue external certainty, the habit becomes your default state. But habits can be broken, not through force, but through awareness and discipline. If you are committed to becoming someone who no longer chases, someone who remains grounded regardless of external behavior, subscribe now. Because every video you watch here reinforces the mindset of emotional independence, and over time, that mindset becomes your identity. The first practical step is deceptively simple, but psychologically profound. Stop seeking validation externally. This does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop outsourcing your self-worth. It means you stop measuring your value based on someone else's attention. Because attention is not a reliable measure of value. Attention is influenced by mood, circumstances, timing, distraction, but your value exists independently of these variables. The Stoic philosopher Seneca taught that true strength comes from belonging completely to yourself, from reaching a point where your sense of identity is internally generated, not externally granted. Because when your value is internally generated, it becomes stable, it becomes consistent, it becomes immune to external fluctuation. This is the foundation of emotional independence. The second step is to reclaim your attention. Attention is your most valuable psychological resource. Wherever your attention goes, your emotional energy follows. When your attention is constantly directed towards someone else's behavior, you weaken your own internal state. But when your attention returns to your own growth, your own discipline, your own purpose, your internal state strengthens. This is why the Stoics emphasized personal responsibility. Not responsibility for controlling others, but responsibility for mastering oneself. When you wake up in the morning, your focus should not be on who might validate you. Your focus should be on who you are becoming, what you are building, what you are strengthening. because the more you invest in yourself, the less you depend on external reinforcement, and dependence is the root of emotional instability. The third step is the most difficult, but also the most liberating. Accept that you can lose anyone. This does not mean you become indifferent. It means you become free, because fear of loss creates emotional slavery. When you fear losing someone, you begin to modify your behavior to prevent that loss. You become less authentic, less honest, less grounded. You begin to act strategically instead of naturally, and this destroys your internal stability. But when you accept that loss is always possible, something powerful happens. Fear loses its grip on you. You no longer act out of desperation. You act out of alignment. The Stoics practiced negative visualization. They mentally prepared themselves for loss, not to create suffering, but to build resilience. Because when you accept loss internally, you stop fearing it externally. And when you stop fearing loss, you stop chasing, because chasing is driven by fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of insignificance. But when you are internally secure, these fears lose their influence. The fourth step is to strengthen your internal world daily. Emotional strength is not built in moments of comfort. It is built in moments of restraint. Each time you feel the urge to chase but choose stillness instead, you reinforce your independence. Each time you feel uncertainty but choose calm instead, you reinforce your stability. These small moments accumulate. They reshape your nervous system. They reshape your identity. Until one day, you notice something extraordinary. You no longer feel the urge to chase, not because you are suppressing it, but because it no longer exists. You have outgrown it. This is when you become truly dangerous, in the psychological sense, because you can no longer be controlled through attention. You can no longer be manipulated through absence. You can no longer be destabilized through uncertainty. Your center exists within you, not outside of you. If this message resonates with you, comment below, "I am in control." Because the moment you declare it consciously, you reinforce it neurologically. You strengthen the identity you are building. And identity determines behavior. Once your identity shifts from someone who seeks validation to someone who embodies stability, everything changes. Your posture changes. Your tone changes. Your presence changes. You no longer move with emotional urgency. You move with emotional certainty. And certainty creates psychological gravity. People begin to notice your calm. They begin to notice your independence. They begin to notice that you are no longer easily influenced. Not because you are trying to impress them, but because you have stopped trying to extract anything from them. You are complete, and completeness is rare. Most people remain in a constant state of emotional reaction. They react to messages, react to silence, react to attention, react to absence. But the Stoic observes instead of reacting. Observation creates distance. Distance creates control. Control creates stability, and stability creates respect. Because respect is not something you demand. Respect is something you embody. The final paradox is this: when you stop chasing, you stop signaling emotional dependence. And when you stop signaling emotional dependence, you begin signaling emotional strength. This signal is subconscious, but powerful. People sense it. They sense that your emotional state does not rely on them. They sense that your presence is freely given, not desperately maintained. They sense that you are internally anchored. And this changes how they perceive you, because human beings naturally respect those who respect themselves, not through words, but through behavior, through boundaries, through presence, through restraint. This is why the Stoic never chases. Because the Stoic understands that chasing is not an act of love. It is an act of fear, and fear destroys internal stability. But self-possession creates internal stability, and internal stability creates external respect. If you are ready to become someone who no longer chases, someone who no longer depends on external validation, someone who remains calm, grounded, and internally powerful regardless of circumstances, subscribe now. Because this channel exists to help you build a mind that cannot be destabilized by external forces, a mind that remains calm in uncertainty, a mind that remains grounded in absence, a mind that remains complete on its own. Because in the end, the Stoic does not chase attention. He attracts respect through his presence. He does not chase validation. He embodies certainty. He does not chase others. He masters himself. And the moment you master yourself, you become someone no longer driven by fear, no longer controlled by absence, no longer weakened by uncertainty. You become someone rare, someone grounded, someone internally free. And what is internally free can never be controlled externally. This is the Stoic path, and it begins the moment you stop chasing. There is a moment in every person's life when they begin to see clearly, not because the world changed, but because they did. At first, nothing looks different on the outside. The same people exist, the same routines continue, the same environments remain, but internally, something is no longer the same. The urgency is gone. The need is gone. The invisible chain that once pulled you toward others has broken, and when that happens, something extraordinary begins to emerge. Freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from escaping responsibility, but the kind that comes from no longer being emotionally controlled by the presence or absence of someone else. This is the freedom the Stoics understood deeply. Epictetus taught that true power comes from recognizing what is within your control and what is not. You cannot control whether someone values you. You cannot control whether someone responds to you. You cannot control whether someone stays in your life, but you can control yourself. You can control your thoughts, your actions, your standards, your emotional independence, and that is where your real power begins. Because the moment you stop trying to control what is not yours, you finally gain control over what is. Most people never reach this point. They spend their lives reacting to messages, reacting to silence, reacting to attention, reacting to rejection. Their emotional state is constantly being decided by forces outside of them. They are not living from strength. They are living from reaction. And reaction is weakness, not because reacting is wrong, but because constant reaction means constant dependence. The Stoic breaks this cycle, not by becoming cold, not by becoming distant, but by becoming sovereign, internally sovereign, stable regardless of external conditions, present regardless of external validation, complete regardless of external approval. And this changes everything, because people can sense it. They can sense when someone is emotionally dependent, and they can sense when someone is not. Dependence creates pressure. Independence creates attraction. Dependence creates tension. Independence creates respect. Dependence creates imbalance. Independence creates stability. This is why chasing never works long-term, because chasing communicates one message clearly. I need something from you to feel complete. And the moment that message is felt, the balance shifts, not necessarily consciously, but psychologically. Humans are naturally drawn to stability, not instability, to strength, not fragility, to certainty, not desperation. And when you stop chasing, you stop communicating desperation. You begin communicating certainty, certainty in yourself, certainty in your path, certainty in your value, not arrogance, not ego, but grounded certainty, the kind that does not need to announce itself, the kind that simply exists. Seneca once said that the person who depends on themselves alone achieves the greatest form of freedom, because dependence creates vulnerability. Not physical vulnerability, but emotional vulnerability, the kind where your peace can be taken from you by someone else's decision. The Stoic refuses to give that power away, not because they do not care, but because they care about something deeper, their inner stability, their inner peace, their inner alignment. They understand something most people never fully grasp, that chasing someone often means abandoning yourself, abandoning your priorities, abandoning your growth, abandoning your peace, abandoning your dignity, slowly, quietly, without realizing it. You begin to reorganize your life around someone else's presence. Their availability becomes your priority. Their attention becomes your reward. Their absence becomes your pain. And without noticing, you stop being the center of your own life. You become a satellite orbiting someone else. This is what the Stoic refuses to become. The Stoic remains centered, not rigid, not closed, but centered. They welcome people into their life, but they do not build their identity around them. They value connection, but they do not depend on it for self-worth. They appreciate presence, but they are not destroyed by absence. This emotional independence creates something rare: consistency. You are the same person whether someone stays or leaves. You are the same person whether someone approves or disapproves. You are the same person whether someone notices or ignores you, because your identity is not built on their perception. It is built on your character, and character cannot be taken from you. This is why Stoicism emphasizes internal development above external outcomes, because external outcomes are unpredictable, but internal development is always available. Every day, you can become more disciplined. Every day, you can become more calm. Every day, you can become more focused. Every day, you can become more complete. And as you do, something subtle begins to happen. You stop needing external confirmation, not because you reject people, but because you no longer rely on them to define you. This is emotional maturity. This is psychological strength. This is Stoic power. And paradoxically, this is what makes others value you more, because people value what is not easily controlled. They value what is not easily influenced. They value what is not easily destabilized. They value what stands on its own. Marcus Aurelius ruled one of the most powerful empires in history, yet his greatest battle was not external. It was internal. He constantly reminded himself not to depend on praise, not to depend on recognition, not to depend on approval, because he understood that dependence weakens judgment, dependence weakens clarity, dependence weakens freedom. And freedom is the foundation of dignity. When you stop chasing, you reclaim that dignity. You reclaim your time. You reclaim your energy. You reclaim your focus. You reclaim yourself. And once you reclaim yourself, something remarkable happens. You begin to grow faster. Your mind becomes clearer. Your emotions become calmer. Your actions become more intentional. Your presence becomes stronger, not louder, stronger. Quiet strength. The kind that does not need to prove itself, the kind that does not need to convince anyone, the kind that simply exists, and people feel it. They may not understand it, but they feel it, because stability is rare, emotional independence is rare, self-control is rare, and rarity creates value, not artificial value, real value, the kind that cannot be faked, the kind that cannot be forced, the kind that can only be built. Slowly, through discipline, through awareness, through self-respect. This is the path of the Stoic. Not the path of isolation, but the path of internal strength. Not the path of emotional suppression, but the path of emotional mastery. Not the path of rejecting others, but the path of never abandoning yourself. Because in the end, the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. And when that relationship becomes strong, everything else changes. There comes a point in this journey where something irreversible happens, not outside, but inside. It is quiet, almost invisible, but it changes everything. It is the moment you stop waiting, not waiting for someone to text you, not waiting for someone to choose you, not waiting for someone to recognize your value. You simply stop waiting. And in that moment, You return to yourself. Your energy, which was once scattered across expectations, returns to its source. Your attention, which was once consumed by uncertainty, becomes focused again. Your mind, which was once restless, becomes still. And in that stillness, you discover something most people never experience: peace that does not depend on anyone else. This is not loneliness, this is sovereignty. Because loneliness comes from absence, but sovereignty comes from completeness. You are no longer trying to fill a void, because there is no void left to fill. You stop chasing distractions. You stop chasing validation. You stop chasing people who could not see your worth. And instead, you began building yourself. Piece by piece, thought by thought, action by action, day by day. This is where true transformation lives. Not in forcing others to stay, but in becoming someone who does not need to force anything, because force is always a sign of weakness, and the Stoic understands this deeply. Force creates resistance, desperation creates distance, but strength creates gravity. When you become emotionally stable, mentally disciplined, and internally complete, something shifts. You stop trying to attract attention, and yet attention finds you. You stop trying to impress, and yet people become impressed. You stop trying to convince, and yet people become convinced. Not because you manipulated anything, but because you changed. Because when you are no longer chasing, you move differently, you speak differently, you think differently, you exist differently. Your presence becomes calm, grounded, certain. You are no longer reacting to every emotional impulse. You are no longer disturbed by every external change. You are no longer controlled by every moment of uncertainty. You become still, and stillness is power. Because most people cannot be still. They need noise, they need reassurance, they need constant stimulation to avoid facing themselves. But the Stoic faces themselves fully, without distraction, without avoidance, without fear. And in doing so, they eliminate the root of emotional dependence. They realize something liberating, that their worth was never something to be given by others. It was always something to be built within. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself as a reminder, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." This is the foundation of everything. Because once you truly understand this, you stop surrendering your peace to external outcomes. You stop negotiating your dignity. You stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else. And this is where the final paradox reveals itself. The moment you stop needing anyone is the moment people begin needing you. Not in a superficial way, but in a deeper psychological way, because they sense your stability, they sense your independence, they sense your strength. You are no longer easy to control, and that makes you valuable, not because you became distant, but because you became whole. You stopped shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's comfort. You stopped lowering your standards to avoid being alone. You stopped betraying your own peace to maintain someone else's presence, and in doing so, you sent a message, not through words, but through behavior, a message that says, "I respect myself," and self-respect changes everything, because people treat you based on what you tolerate. And when you stop tolerating disrespect internally, external disrespect begins to disappear, not magically, but naturally. Because your standards become visible, not through demands, but through absence. You no longer argue for your worth, you embody it. You no longer chase attention, you attract respect. You no longer fear losing people, you trust yourself enough to let them go. And this is the ultimate freedom, not the freedom of controlling others, but the freedom of no longer being controlled. This is why the Stoic never chases, because they understand something deeper than most. They understand that chasing comes from fear, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being alone. But when you remove that fear, chasing disappears naturally. You don't force yourself to stop chasing. You simply no longer feel the need to, because you are no longer operating from lack. You are operating from completeness, and completeness is unshakable. It cannot be taken. It cannot be threatened. It cannot be manipulated. It simply exists. This is the version of you that emerges through Stoic discipline. Not cold, not emotionless, but emotionally sovereign. You can love without attachment. You can care without dependence. You can connect without losing yourself, because you are no longer trying to extract value from others. You are bringing value with you, and that changes every interaction. People sense when someone is trying to take, and they sense when someone is simply existing in their own strength. The Stoic does not enter a room seeking validation. They enter a room already validated by their own character. This quiet confidence is rare, and rarity creates respect. Not forced respect, not demanded respect, natural respect, because strength does not need to announce itself. It reveals itself through consistency, through calmness, through presence, through emotional control. And this is where everything comes full circle, because in the beginning, you were chasing, you were seeking, you were waiting, you were hoping, you were reacting. But now you are building, you are choosing, you are directing, you are leading, you are becoming. And the more you become, the less you need to chase, because what is meant to align with you will align naturally, not because of luck, but because of who you have become. This is the Stoic path, not a path of gaining control over others, but a path of gaining control over yourself. And once you have control over yourself, nothing external has the power to destabilize you. Not rejection, not absence, not silence, not loss, because your foundation is internal, unshakable, permanent, yours. And this leads to the final truth. Most people spend their lives trying to learn. The Stoic does not chase. The Stoic does not beg. The Stoic does not abandon themselves to keep someone else. The Stoic becomes whole. The Stoic becomes stable. The Stoic becomes complete. And paradoxically, when you stop chasing the world begins to notice you, not because you demanded attention, but because you no longer needed it. And in the end, the Stoic never becomes someone who chases. They become someone worth chasing. If you want to develop this level of mental strength, if you want to stop being controlled by emotions, if you want to build unshakable inner stability, then subscribe now. Because most people will spend their lives chasing validation. Most people will remain emotionally dependent. Most people will never discover their true strength, but you will. This is where your transformation begins.